If people want to follow along in the passage as I'm going along, then it's Philippians 4 on page 1181 in your Bibles. I'm a bit nervous. It's the first time I've been up here speaking at you like this. I'd much rather sing you a song right now. But my prayer for today's talk and for all of the talks that are going to be happening throughout this Wellbeing Journey series is that we go away with more of an understanding about what it means for us to be well, the different aspects of our well-being, and therefore how God has made us, and in that, understand more about our Creator. So, Paul says in this passage in Philippians, don't worry about anything. Okay. I don't know about you, but I hate it when people say don't worry. It usually feels minimising, invalidating, and unhelpful. It's like when someone says, just cheer up when you're sad. And what people mean when they say this is usually something along the lines of, I think this is going to be fine. Or, I don't think how it's going to affect you is that big a deal. Or, I want you to be okay, so please can you just be okay? But it can come across as people not caring or not taking you seriously. It can feel as though you shouldn't be feeling how you're feeling. I'm sure we can all recall a time when someone has said something that we hear as, don't feel like that. And don't worry, I'm not going to spend 20 minutes disagreeing with Paul. We're going to come back to why what he has to say is really good in a bit. But I wanted to start with an acknowledgement that we often hold a belief that emotions are something to be controlled or hidden, that they get in the way of us living our lives, that they get in the way of our relationship with God even. And although there is more and more encouragement to talk openly about emotions and mental health, a lot of the discussion is quite surface level, I think, and centres around emotional management rather than emotional well-being. I'm going to give you all the spoilers at the start of this talk. My 4 main points that I want to get across to you today are, we are emotional beings, and that's okay. Our emotions should be valued and respected. Emotional well-being, as with all of the areas that we're looking at during this series, is connected with all of the types of well-being. And we have a responsibility to understand and manage our emotions. So my first 2 points go together. We are emotional beings. God gave us emotions. We're made in God's image. And Jesus had and displayed emotions. And our emotions should be valued and respected. This means everyone needs to work harder at valuing their own and other people's emotions, because we all feel and express things differently. And it isn't just other people who can ignore or dismiss or understand or invalidate our emotions. We do it to ourselves. Pete Scazzaro, in his book, which is great, by the way, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, writes, ignoring any aspect of who we are as people made in God's image always results in destructive consequences in our relationship with God, with others, and with ourselves. And one of the things I come across most in my work with people as a psychologist is people criticising themselves about the way that they feel, desperately trying to feel another way, and repressing or denying their feelings. And we are so judgmental of ourselves. If any of you have seen the Emotional Wellbeing Journey episode, if you're following along with that, you'll have seen Will van der Hart be interviewed. And if you haven't, sorry, I'm about to give you a little spoiler. But he uses this brilliant metaphor of a thermometer, saying that when a thermometer is put in water, we don't blame the thermometer for communicating the environment that it's in. Even if we think that the water is too hot or too cold, it's not the thermometer's fault. But when we're put into situations that are challenging for us, we often judge ourselves if we do anything other than thrive. We also have a tendency to compare ourselves to others, but we're not all thermometers. If it was safer, what I'd really like to do is to have a bowl of boiling water here and to drop a bunch of different things in it and then get one of you as a willing volunteer to come and hold things after I've bathed them for a minute, but I'm not going to. But I do have it on good authority from a scientist that, a cork would take a different amount of time to warm up than a brass jug, and a wooden bowl would take longer to cool down than a tin. And none of these objects are doing it wrong because they're doing it differently. They're made differently, and they've been through different processes to be what they are. All feelings are valid, and all feelings are important. The second you felt something, you can't unfeel it. You can't change your past emotions. And emotions are big enough and strong enough and important enough that they don't fade quickly. You don't need to be able to justify or explain why you're having an emotion in order to be allowed to have it. Plus, all emotions are useful. We think about good or bad emotions, but actually there are no good or bad emotions. There are ones that we like having and there are ones that we find more difficult. But they all give us information and feedback to keep us safe, to highlight what's important to us, to alert us to an injustice, to build connection, to drive us, to draw our focus to new situations and experiences. But we often learn the opposite somewhere along the way, that emotions are not to be trusted. that they're irrational and that they're less desirable than rationality, and definitely that some emotions are okay and others are not. It is so important that if we're going to be emotionally healthy, we value emotions, and we don't value the heart less than the mind. They play different roles, but logic devoid of emotion is no better than emotion devoid of logic. Together they produce a wiser outlook. And emotional well-being includes nurturing our emotions, not seeing them as undesirable parts of ourselves. This means not squishing them down, not pretending that they don't exist, either for our own avoidance or in an attempt to try and make life easier for others. It means not just dealing with the secondary emotion, the thing that's on the surface, and then not looking about what's underneath. For example, often we blame other people for things because of our own insecurities and guilt, which feels more uncomfortable to face. Now, what it means to nurture our emotions or to be emotionally honest looks different for everyone, and that's why we have to accept and respect that we all need different things. If someone needs something that you don't or doesn't need something that you do, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing it wrong. For example, I'm a verbal processor, you might have guessed. I find it quite easy to talk about my emotions, whether that's my natural disposition or because of my training that I've had. But for me, talking things through with someone that I trust and probably giving them more information than they need is really helpful for me. But people closest to me know that if I want to talk something through, it's not going to be a quick thing and it might be quite intense. So I've learned that unless it's got to the point where I really can't, I need to ask people, can I talk to you about this? And if not now, when? Or to go and ask somebody else. Other people don't need to talk things through at length. Or they value the time to think things through more thoroughly before they communicate it with other people. Some people love a good cry, time alone to feel the feelings to a soundtrack of emotive music. Others would prefer to go for a run. Some people feel comfortable telling anyone who asks how they're doing, and others would say they're only really known by a small handful of people. Some people's emotions are huge, they feel things really deeply. Others seem more steady and less easily affected by things around them. I've learnt that over the years, my incredulity that my husband can seem completely unbothered by something that I'm extremely excited or angry or anxious about doesn't make him suddenly see things the way that I do and react the same way, which I'm very thankful for, quite frankly. But it isn't that I'm overreacting or he's underreacting. We're both reacting from our own different positions. So thirdly, our emotional well-being is linked with all of our other types of well-being. But this is more complex than simply one area of well-being affecting another. We can do things for our emotional or our physical or our spiritual well-being, but unless we really understand that they can't be separated out, we'll only ever tackle our well-being on a surface level. But going deeper requires complexity. I just want to give you a couple of examples and try not to steal too much from the future talks about spiritual or relational well-being. But I believe, firstly, that it is perfectly possible to be spiritually well, to be connected to God, to be experiencing the joy of the Lord, even feeling a real sense of deep peace, and to still be depressed. It is harmful to assume that someone's mood is reflective of their relationship with God. It becomes an emotional prosperity gospel. Believe enough, pray enough, claim good things, and you will be happy. And this means that people struggling with their mental health end up feeling, or actually being, blamed for their condition in a way that people with physical health conditions just wouldn't be. We can't focus on spiritual well-being and assume that that's going to sort out our emotional well-being. Also, I think relationships are particularly important for emotional well-being. The longer I work in mental health services, the more I'm convinced that the best interventions involve a relational aspect. We understand who we are in relation to other people. We learn about emotions through our early relationships. When we're babies, we don't know what we're feeling. We rely on other people to name that for us and to teach us the words for how we feel, as well as helping us and then eventually teaching us how to manage and appropriately express our emotions. And our God is a relational God. I remember my dad saying from when I was really young, Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship. God didn't create the world and then leave us to sort ourselves out. From the very beginning, he sought a relationship with us, and now we have this amazing gift of being able to have our own private line to the creator of the universe. Jesus came to earth as a baby, to grow up in a family, to have a community. He could have just pinged onto the earth at the age of 30, but he had a childhood, one that included family trauma, one with human parents. We were made in our relational God's image, made for relationship with him and with others. But relationships can be both a place of healing and a place of harm. So how can we try and ensure that they benefit our emotional well-being as much as possible? I'm going to share 2 suggestions with you, and this is not an exhaustive list. But first of all, setting boundaries is so important. Even Jesus set boundaries. He had more capacity than any of us to love and to serve, and he still spent time alone. We are called to love and serve others, but we're told to love others as ourselves. And if I asked you just to call to mind for a moment the person or one of the people that you love most in the whole world, do you care about and treat yourself the way that you treat them? Probably not. To do so feels quite selfish a lot of the time. But God sees you as incredibly precious and wants you to have life in all its fullness. And I'm not going to get into the interpretation of that sentence, but I do know that burning out by taking on too much of other people's stuff isn't it. Of course, there are times where one person leans on the other more, but it shouldn't feel skewed all the time. And it's okay to invite trusted others into that relationship, family, friends, or professionals, to help shoulder some of the inevitable load that we take on when we allow other people into our lives. I have lots of clients who say that their aim is to not let their emotions affect anyone else. And I say, I'm really sorry, but that is an occupational hazard of having relationships. We agree to be affected by others in difficult ways so that we can also be affected by them in amazing ways. But we don't have to agree to be consumed by someone or abused or taken for granted. And we shouldn't ever have to try to be anyone's everything. And secondly, don't try to change people or change yourselves to fit them. Jesus saw everyone he came into contact with as an individual. And he told people not to sin, which is great advice, but he didn't tell them to change their personalities. We all see the world a bit differently, and the aim shouldn't be to try and get everyone to change their perspective to fit yours, or even to change everyone's perspective so that we're all seeing the same way. It should be to understand each other's perspective, respect it and value it, and in doing so, respect and value your own. Because if we go through the world believing that there is a right and a wrong way to feel and respond in every situation, either you or someone else will always be doing it wrong. And this fosters blame and criticism and shame. Not everyone's going to be receptive to your efforts to work on this. And I would say if you can't be emotionally open and honest with people in your life, then it's important to question whether they're in the right circle for you. So, for example, I don't have to be completely open and honest with all of my work colleagues, and I'm definitely not with my clients, but I am with my husband and my best friends. And it's okay to not share parts of yourself with people who will not respect them. My last point is this. We have a responsibility to understand and manage our own emotions. As you know, I work with children, and I often have parents asking me how they can validate their child's emotions while also making sure that they know that hitting their sibling isn't okay. And I say all emotions are okay, but all behaviour isn't. We have a responsibility to manage our emotions well enough. And again, that ideally involves others allowing us to feel how we feel, being interested in knowing how we feel, and that personal responsibility being modelled to us as well, which I appreciate does not always happen. But everyone can learn more about themselves, become more emotionally aware, and use this information to respond more often than we react. We've already said we can't completely control our emotions, but we need to know that our emotions don't completely control us either. Sometimes we have even less interest in understanding ourselves than other people because it can be a really painful process and an irritating one, because even though we might want to be different, my experience is that very few people are actually willing to do the work of change to get there. And it doesn't feel fair because often the reason that we're struggling is because something external and outside of our control has happened, or someone's used their freedom to hurt us or to take ours away. And I want to be very clear that what I'm not saying is that anyone's mental health difficulties are their own fault. I spend so much of my time telling people I work with that things are not their fault. But unfortunately, no one else does the work of healing for you. Even when God does things in us, he requires something of us. Ros was talking last week about the Wellbeing mindset and the woman at the well, and noticed that she was responsive, receptive, and reflective. She wasn't passive. And Ros's fourth R was relational. And a relationship is never one way. Even if it feels like what we're contributing and giving to God is a tiny, tiny amount compared to what God is doing, that is okay. God doesn't ask for more than we're able to give. He is our strength, our shield, our guide, our protector, but he isn't our controller. He asks and he waits. And what he asks for often feels really hard. And what feels painful and difficult and challenging and transformational for one person is going to be different than for someone else. So in Mark chapter 12, there's the story of the widow's offering. And in verses 43 to 44, Jesus says, I tell you the truth. This poor widow has put more into the offering box than all the others, for they all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in what she had to live on, everything she had. Now, here he's obviously talking about financial wealth, but I think this applies to anything that we have to give. We don't just spend money, we spend time, we spend physical energy, we spend emotional energy. And something that's emotionally invigorating for me might be very draining for someone else, and vice versa. But here's the thing, nobody else knows what drains me unless I tell them. No one else has the ability or the responsibility to put boundaries in place, to say no to things, to ask for help, to say that I'm struggling. And of course, the people closest to us get more and more skilled at noticing those warning signs. A lot of you are probably familiar with the fact that I use the metaphor of a stress bucket quite often. The idea that little things and big things can fill that up to a point where we feel like we're just not coping anymore. And people around us do start to notice when that bucket is getting full. But at the end of the day, it's our bucket. And when it feels like we can't cope, that bit at the top where it feels like nothing we do will do any good, that's when we need to go back to a place of understanding and allowing, rather than trying to manage and control our emotions. And to a place of giving it to God. Even if all we can do is invite him into our worry. I told you we'd make it back to the passage. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Remember that God is there and can help even in the seemingly small, stressful things. Let him walk alongside you and don't think that you have to do it alone. Give God your attention, your time, and allow him to be the loving, caring, and involved Father that he wants to be in your life. What we know Paul and Jesus aren't saying when they say don't worry is, don't worry because nothing bad is going to happen and everything is absolutely going to be fine, so there's nothing to worry about. Because other passages in the Bible say the exact opposite. In this life you will have trouble. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. For any of you who've struggled with anxiety, you will know that anxiety both simultaneously broadens your awareness to see so many things that could go wrong, and simultaneously completely paralyses you from acting on any of it meaningfully. It's like playing a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. And your brain is a problem-solving and meaning-making machine, so when presented with a problem, it will try to come up with solutions, especially ones which might take away any difficult feelings. But it tricks us into thinking that there will be an end to this game, and we just have to keep going until we find the answer. But this is never the case, and it's like a runaway train that we have to keep getting off every time we're pulled on, rather than just sitting back and waiting for it to stop. And that runaway train never lives in the present moment. It lives in the past, dwelling about things that have already happened and that we can't change, or the future, where we're worrying about countless hypotheticals that might never happen anyway. When Jesus says don't worry about tomorrow, he's saying look at what you have to deal with right now. Focus on what you can control. Let's see what happens, and then we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that. In Matthew 14:27, when the disciples are in the boat in the storm and Jesus walks out to them over the lake, he says, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. We're called to not fear because he is with us, not because nothing's wrong. And we have to do what we can. As a psychologist, I've got lots and lots of ideas about what this could be, which I won't go into now in a lot of detail, but tools that we can build up over time. There are cognitive strategies, including what Paul says in the latter half of our passage. Focus on things that are good, that are true. It takes a lot longer for us to, if we focus on something that's negative versus if we focus on something that's positive, it will imprint in our brains. But if we want the positive thing to imprint to the same degree as the negative thing, we have to focus on it for, I think it's something like another 14 seconds. So that's an evolutionary thing about it keeps us safe if we pay attention to things more quickly that are potentially dangerous for us. Focusing on things that are positive don't give us the same benefits in terms of safety. They give us different types of benefits. But those benefits are things that we have to be more intentional about seeking. There are also things like relaxation, physical tools, social tools, as well as spiritual tools. And I did a talk at the Women's Day a while ago and at Prime Time about building an emotional toolbox. And if any of you missed those sessions but would like a handout that gives a few more examples of that, then do let me or the church office know and we'll get that to you. But if all we can do is pray, that's what we do. Like Steve said in the confession, actually, sometimes all our hearts can do is say sorry. Sometimes all our hearts can do is say help. Sometimes all our hearts can do is say please. And we can always pray, even if there are other things that we can do as well, even if there are things that we can put into action. And that's something that I definitely need to remember, rather than telling God to sit back and not worry because I've got this one and I'm going to call him in later for the heavy lifting. And we can go to him for a break. Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He doesn't say, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will take away your problems." But he will give us the strength to carry on. We're also called to put our worries into perspective, to be aware of what we need, not what we want, not what we think is important, and to keep our eyes on the fact that ultimately, as believers, we have this really brilliant eternity to look forward to, where no matter what we go through in this life, we will be with our Saviour, and nothing anyone or anything can throw at us is going to change that, which I think is a paraphrase of Romans 8. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't take our comparatively small day-to-day lives seriously. To him, we are all special and our lives all matter. And it doesn't mean that we can't have difficult emotions. Jesus wept, even though he knew he could raise Lazarus from the dead. He still grieved. We can know that things are going to be okay, know that something will be over eventually, or even fairly soon, and still be anxious or angry or sad. We know it will all be okay in the end, but we're still angry about injustice, and so we should be. We know it will all be okay in the end, but we still feel sad when we lose someone, and so we should. People understand this on a more significant scale, but if we truly value emotional experience and expression, then we have to value it on a smaller everyday scale as well. So we've come all the way back to my first point. We are all emotional beings, and that's okay. And we need to understand, value, and respect our emotions. So there's a lot in there, and where conciseness has never been a strength of mine. And I don't expect anyone to take all of that and run with it, but hopefully there is something in there that you can use to take one step towards improving your emotional well-being. Just to say as well, finally, that for some of you this will land quite comfortably and feel very encouraging. Others are going to feel a bit overwhelmed or raw. Others will notice some of the critical voices about our emotional lives fighting back against some of what I've said. And the whole point of any talk, but definitely these ones about well-being, is that they are not the definitive authority on any topic, nor will any one talk be all you need to improve your well-being. Go away and discuss this with people that you trust, and try and identify just one thing that you can commit to doing for your emotional well-being. So Johnny and the band are going to come up and lead us in a song now about God's love for us being just so very vast. But I just wanted to share a quote first as well, a line from another song that I really love about God being our creator. It's called Raggedy Doll. And the line is, "I don't make mistakes, and I wouldn't change a thing." God doesn't have a blueprint for a human that he's programmed into a machine that's gone wrong at some point. You are handcrafted. And my biggest tip for improving emotional well-being is to increase emotional awareness and explore with God how that is part of how he has made you. So let's pray. God, thank you so much that you made us in your image and that you came to earth fully human, that we can have a relationship with you that's based on so much shared experience. Thank you that you're big enough that we're all unique. Help us to see ourselves the way you do and accept the emotional parts of us. Thank you for how much you love us. Amen.